This period we are in of COVID-19 has seen a high rise of incidences of gender-based violence. Lockdown by itself, we anticipated will see high increase rates of violence against women and children, precisely because we are in societies where violence against women is high in any case. And when people are now confined in the same space where you have people who are predisposed to exposure to violence by their partners, it is likely that the violence will increase. We predicted this, we wrote about it and alerted the authorities so that we anticipate how best should we deal with this matter. Sadly, I don't think we have put in enough and adequate mechanisms to respond to this. The call centers by themselves are not enough. Women are calling in, children are calling in, and the responses are not as adequate as they should be. Speaking in a webinar yesterday, Shahida Omar of Teddy Bear responded, gave an intervention that indicated a high increase of calls by children who are in distress in the lockdown situation at their homes. And the challenge now is how do you make interventions that are useful and that will take the pressure away from the children and deal with the perpetrator. In South Africa, we have many challenges with regards to this, not just because of the lockdown, but because the level of response to gender-based violence has not been wholly adequate. There are still many gaps, which is part of the reason why we are seeing these high rates of gender-based violence. I'm impressed with some countries because, of course, gender-based violence knows no race, knows no geography, it knows no status. Lockdown is indicating that levels of violence have increased the world over. I was reading a very interesting intervention in Italy, for instance, and in France, where in Italy the government is providing uh, accommodation that will take the perpetrator out of the home situation where he is the cause of the violence in the home, so that the partner and the children are left in the comfort of their home and are able to continue with their lives and manage their situation during this difficult moment of COVID. I think it's worth considering for ourselves in this country why we should not be considering what is called bail houses in some countries for perpetrators of violence, so that we remove from the scene those that are causing the problem and not those who are victims of the perpetrators. In this instance, it is going to be very important that we find all sectors of society coalescing together around interventions that can make the necessary difference. Churches are very important in our context. They remain very influential and very present in many contexts of our communities. It is important that these influential leaders, our faith leaders, play a role in providing safety environments for the survivors of gender-based violence in their homes. Of course, there's a lot that we can do. We have, for instance, through interventions like We Will Speak Out South Africa, provided guidance and mobilized and lobbied church leaders for their response in the scourge against violence against women. But the direct challenge confronting us now is that such interventions are excluded from the directives of the disaster management regulations. So even if churches were willing to make their spaces available to provide the necessary psychosocial support, to provide counseling. All of this can only be done through the means of a telephone, Skype, and some such interventions. These are still useful and, of course, meaningful during this context, but they are not adequate because not everybody has access to a telephone at this time. Not everybody can afford data so that they can call. Not everyone has got the means that they can make a call. And you still have many people who find it difficult to make such calls because the perpetrator is still in the house and it's not possible to can make a call where you are calling for support in an environment where your perpetrator is actually staring in your face. So we do need to find ways in which through the Department of Social Development, we include in the regulations the interventions on gender-based violence and basically broad social intervention services to be declared essential services so that permits can be made available to those that are willing to provide the necessary interventions during this time. And then programs can be developed taking into account all the necessary precautions that are required for this period of social distancing, but providing support to those that desperately need the support so that people are not left on their own with their perpetrators during a period that is difficult where you are locked down and cannot even run to your neighbor to seek for help. So we need to really think out of the box and consider what are the new innovative ways in which we can do these things. The suggestions I've raised earlier of other countries like France and Italy, unfortunately, will be difficult for us as South Africa at the moment, given the many social challenges we have. But it's something that we need to think about down the road, whether we should not be beginning to consider legal reforms such that in the context of gender-based violence, we remove the perpetrator from the scene and not those that are being violated, who end up having to be sheltered in homes which are under-resourced, where there are strict regulations, understandably so, under the circumstances, where, for instance, children of particular ages cannot be allowed, and it complicates matters. Boys, for instance, find it difficult to be in a same environment with their mothers in the context of a shelter. So we need to rethink quite vigorously how we respond to the scourge of gender-based violence in the context of COVID-19. And for that to happen, it requires a lot of empathy, a lot of commitment from our side to ensure that there is a lot of response and services that are made available to those that are in need. The call centers themselves are running at extreme levels of desperation because they do not have their pre-required number of people that can take the calls. Social development reports that the calls have increased manifold during this period. It would be incumbent, I believe, on social development to employ the many social workers that are trained, that are unemployed. There are several in civil society organizations who have been trained in basic counseling, who provide this kind of service in normal circumstances, that can be trained quickly to can take calls and relieve the enormous burden confronting those that are in the call centers at the moment. A colleague in a webinar organized by the Department of Women yesterday made a suggestion. Call centers don't need big rooms. They don't need huge infrastructure. She actually made a point about what Telkom is doing. All you need is a laptop. You need a particular software that is able to manage the calls, and you need a person that can be on the other end of their services. So if this can be done, we should be able to leverage data from the service providers and elicit the support of many South Africans who are out there of goodwill from civil society, who are willing to avail their time to speak to those that are in distress, who need help, so that when these calls are made, people are not stuck for minutes on end because the call center is clogged up with many calls. These are easy solutions that can be done and are within our means. I urge that we consider these very seriously. There are many clergy who have been trained in psychosocial support, in counseling, who can make their skills available at this time. Instead of asking for money from people, we should be availing our skills so that we are there to support those that need our services most at this time. Thank you.